Hello, and welcome to the NEASC Virtual Global Forum. This week's topic is an urgent and important one for many schools. Reopening schools safely, insights, successes, and lessons learned. Thank you for joining us today, together with other NEASC educators and friends across the world. We are pleased to welcome more than 2,000 attendees from over 70 different countries to today's session. Today we will hear from school leaders among the first to reopen their schools in Denmark, Germany, and South Korea, and hope to convey ideas for other schools designing their reopening plans. Thank you to our panelists for providing some recent images from their schools that we can share with you today. You can see those on your screen now. We'll do our best to highlight how some of these pioneering schools have managed their first days back in this new era of social distancing, though of course 1 hour will not allow us to convey every topic of interest or question related to reopening. Those who have attended a virtual forum in prior weeks know that this format offers connections and insights from leading educators and others to serve the learning needs of our global NEASC family, now in 80 countries and of course in our 6 New England states. We've created the hashtag NEASC Forum and encourage you to use it when commenting on social media about today's hashtag NEASC Forum. If you missed any of our prior forums, you can find recordings of them on our website, where you can also register for upcoming sessions. I am Jeff Bradley, Director of the Commission on International Education at NEASC, and working with me today is my colleague Trillium Hiblin, who is the Associate Director of our Commission. A few quick words about our format today. Attendees can interact with each other using the chat feature, and if you have questions for our panelists, please ask them in the Q&A section. And you are, of course, all on mute at this point. Our thanks to those of you who submitted questions with your registration. If other questions come in now, we'll do our best to include a few by the end of the conversation. Participants can also click on the thumbs up icon on questions that come up in the Q&A today to indicate your interest in that question. So today we're joined by 4 international school leaders: Paul Fochman from Frankfurt International School, Shirley Jacobson from Rugard's International Primary School on the outskirts of Copenhagen, Denmark, Kevin Skio from the Dwight School in Seoul, South Korea, and Andrew Cross from the International School in Hamburg, Germany. I'll now hand it over to my co-host Trillium to begin the conversation. Trillium, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. First, we'd like to have you introduce yourselves briefly and tell us about the students that you serve and when you went on to distance learning and when you have started to reopen your school. If you could start with Shirley, please.
Yes, hello to everybody. My name is Shirley Jacobsen. I'm the head of the primary school in Copenhagen at Hellerup, Copenhagen. Our school is a Danish school, so we have an international school and a Danish school under one roof. We have approximately 500 children in each, and we have about 60 different nationalities at the moment. We began to lock down as a nation on the 12th of March, so we've been locked down since the 12th of March, and we reopened on the 15th of April, just for the primary school.
Thank you, Shirley. Paul, would you like to go next?
Sure. Greetings from Frankfurt. Paul Fochman. I'm the head of school here at Frankfurt International School. We have about 1,850 students on 2 campuses, a First Steps through grade 8 in Wiesbaden and a First Steps, which is our 3-year-olds, through grade 12 here in Oberursel. We began on March 13th. We closed March 16th. We were beginning our DLP. And then we began our reopening May 4th, May 18th, May 25th, and June 2nd, bringing everyone back in a way that we'll discuss in the future. We serve a diverse population, 60+ nationalities, serving the local, multinational, and corporate core that's here in Frankfurt.
Thank you, Paul. Andrew, would you like to go next, please?
And delighted to be part of this discussion today. We're an international day school of just under 800 students, and we're located in the western suburbs of Hamburg, not far from the Elbe River. We serve an expat and local population of families who are interested in the internationally minded education that we can provide. We closed our campus on March the 16th, and that was a government directive here in Hamburg. And we reopened 2 grade levels on May the 4th, grades 5 and 6. And we've brought our grade 11s in starting this past Monday, May 11th, for afternoon sessions. And we'll be expanding to other grade levels in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Andrew. Kevin? We can't hear you yet, Kevin, if you want to unmute.
Sorry
Thank
about that. I hit the wrong button. Welcome. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Trillium. From Seoul, South Korea, I'm the founding head of the Dwight School, the 5th Ivy World School in the world, part of the network. The day has started with a rather large issue, and many of you will know that we plan to start our school tomorrow, Wednesday, but we've been pushed back to next week. We have had a start-stop scenario since February, where Korea has come out on top in terms of leading the world in the approach to dealing with the virus. But in terms of starting school, we have been delayed by 1 more week, given the recent resurgence in the Itaewon area. So I'm here, I'm listening, and I'm willing to offer all the expertise and advice that I have and I can share. So thank you.
Thank you all. Let's start out by talking about how you are reopening, which grade levels are starting, who made that decision? Was that a directive from a government body, or was that based on your own internal conversations? Let's see, who would like to start? Paul, would you like to start?
Sure.
Which grade levels? Yeah.
So we originally, the government had allowed the 4th or 5th grade, depending on your exit grade from elementary school, and the upper grades of 11 and 12 to come back. On Friday at 2:51, there was a case filed by a family that said, we don't want to be basically the guinea pigs for the elementary school. So the court stopped the lower schools from going back, but not the upper schools. So we began with 11 and 12 coming back, along with emergency care. So we have kids from 3-year-olds up that if they have some special employment designation, we're obligated to provide a program for them. So we've had that in place for that, 11 and 12 in place. And then we're going, I don't think you want to get into that now, but we're going down and then hitting other grades here in the next week.
Great, thanks.
Requirement, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Shirley, what was the situation in Denmark?
In Denmark, it was the government that chose that the schools from reception class to year 6 would go back. And in Denmark, it was quite unique in that we were the very first things to open in Denmark. So that was the way they chose to reopen the whole of Denmark. So to allow the parents really to go back to work, and even to work at home, of course, so that they could concentrate on their work rather than distance learning with their children.
Mm-hmm. Kevin?
The plan was initiated from the Ministry of Education on a weekly entry based on the 12th grade coming in first, followed by 11th and 9th, 3, 4, 8, 10, and then by June the 1st, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. Slightly an issue for us in that we weren't sure what the logic was for it from the foreign school or the international school perspective, but I think the ministry was mostly following Korean exams and the priorities given with that. So there has been some petition with regards to international schools wishing to have a different pattern, given the fact that we are ending the school year and they are starting. But generally, this was a mandate coming from top down based on the Korean exams and the Korean public schools.
Right, thank you. And Andrew?
As an independent school, we had the opportunity to be a little bit more flexible than the Hamburg public schools, which were basically opening according to those grade levels that were writing exams or in transition from one school to another in terms of elementary to middle or middle to high. But because we're a pre-K to 12 school, we were given permission to open grade levels that were most appropriate for us. So as I said, we initially opened grades 5 and 6. We've brought in grade 11 this week. And we're now going to be able to have up to 50% of students in the school at any one time. Initially, that figure was 25%. So we had to calibrate our grade levels according to staying under the ceiling of 25%. So things are opening up for us, and we're excited to be able to welcome more grade levels in the coming weeks.
So how do you manage ongoing distance learning, because some of your students are obviously not in school, and the physical learning that's occurring within the building? How do you manage that from an organizational staffing perspective?
One of the challenges that we've encountered, obviously, is that when we have teachers who have multiple grade levels of duties, which is most of our teachers, if we take the secondary school, for example, when grade 6 students came back on campus, those grade 6 teachers also needed to find a way to continue the remote learning for their other grade level cohorts. So we've tried to ensure that by having morning only or afternoon only sessions, the other half of the day is available for the staff to be able to meet the remote learning needs of those other grade levels. So the half-day model has worked quite well. It's also had a positive knock-on effect. We haven't needed to open our cafeteria again, and our preference was to keep it closed for health and hygiene reasons. So students are able to either have lunch before they arrive for the afternoon session or after they finish the morning session. And so food services has been solved in that respect.
Would anyone else like to weigh in on that topic about keeping distance learning going at the same time as physical learning? Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely challenging. I think we know that as we talk about a flipped classroom or blended classroom, hybrid classroom, pivots, all of these terms when kids come back. But I mean, the reality is we've got kids for very valid reasons that aren't coming on site. They have a medical condition. We've got the German government also said if you're 60 plus, you don't need to come back. So we've got teachers at home delivering to kids that are sitting in class. So the whole concept of blended learning has become hugely important. And I think our teachers deserve all the credit. They're just doing a huge effort to make this all work. I think we're all learning our way through it. I think on one end of the spectrum, somebody might just flip the Zoom around and try to do it that way. But we've got teachers that are team teaching and doing room and Zoom together, doing their planning completely differently. Like Andrew said, in our 5th grade, in our 2nd through 5th grade, we're going to do the half-day model as well. But as we're coming down from upper school, we've got 11th graders here every day. And then we're going to do a day 1, day 2 system. So I think it's going to be key that we master the blended learning program, because as we come into August, which heaven forbid, we're not doing this in August, but we're going to all learn collectively a great deal from this 6 weeks of coming back together to say, what is the best model for schools around the world going into August, if we need to do that.
That's great. I think that room and Zoom quote might end up on our Twitter feed today. That's fantastic. I love that. Just playing off of what Andrew was saying, have any of the other schools had to adjust their schedule to accommodate both the blended learning environment that's happening? Shirley or Kevin?
Yes, we completely rewrote our schedule, really. We decided to go with having it like a theme week. So we are working from 9 till 2. And they're totally with their class teacher the whole time. We tried to make sure that only 1 or 2 teachers were with a set of children, so that it minimized the impact of how many children and how many teachers were together. Also, we minimized which buildings they went to as well. So it does mean that all of our other teachers, for example, like a music teacher or a religion teacher, are also sending work into the class teacher, and the class teacher is teaching all the lessons, and the room and Zoom we're working as well. The support teacher next door, or the support teacher is teaching the lessons. So we've got that going as well, with 1 class in 2 classrooms.
Great, Kevin.
We made the decision last week with the senior leaders that we couldn't sustain a blended learning and face-to-face at the same time for the families, especially that were not able to return and would be abroad, or for various reasons preferred to be online as opposed to in the school. So we were planning that as of tomorrow, it would be one or the other based on the entry of schools, students. Being an IB World School, K to 12, most of the families are in the neighborhood and in the area. We've got a unique situation where they're actually petitioning to return, but the system would be phasing out as they entered in week by week.
Great, thank you. All right, let's turn our attention a little bit to some health and safety related questions. We had a lot of questions that came in from our registrants, and interestingly, around the topic of social distancing, we had a lot of questions that said, how in the world do you keep younger kids apart? And then we had the same number of questions that said, how in the world do you keep teenagers apart? So if you could speak to those two aspects of the social distancing question, that would be really helpful. Shirley, you have the youngest children, I think, back in school. Could you start with how do you keep them from touching each other all the time?
Surprisingly well, actually. I think obviously when they come into school, they have to come in ones from the school gate, and they've learnt that really, really well. So now they're almost regimented the way they come in with a metre apart. And we have had to roll up the carpets and all that sort of thing in the reception class and in year one. So obviously having them sitting at desks for quite a bit of the time is a new thing for those age levels, but that's what we've done. So, and they've managed remarkably well. I think children adapt so well. So in the classroom, I would say, and walking in and out and along the corridors, that's not a problem. Lining up for using the bathrooms. Obviously, when they're out in the playground, that's a little bit of a challenge, because even though we've been trying to talk about social distancing games, and they have invented some new social distancing games, it's been really, really good to hear. But at the same time, of course, you know, children are children. But our Prime Minister said exactly the same thing in her press conference when a journalist asked her, and she said that the models that they made in Denmark were made with the small children giving each other a hug and not social distancing. So they took that into account. So so playtimes, they're still only with their class. So they're limited in who they're mixing with. So in that sense, it's limited, but yeah, it is quite difficult at playtime to keep them apart.
Thank you. Andrew. Oop, you're back on mute. Thanks.
Thanks, Julia. We created a system that controlled access to the building from the moment the students emerge from their car at the drop-off zone. So we have staggered arrival times, and also different entrances for our 5th and 6th graders, so that the grade level groups queue up at the beginning of their respective entrance. And we painted lines on the pavement, 1.5 meters apart, so they enter the building in single file. We also closed our drink fountains, so the water fountains are not operating. It's those small details that our facility and nursing staff were thinking about. A lot of signage around the building, only one person, for example, in an office or in a bathroom at a time. We created a second nursing room, so kind of a second infirmary for students who develop a fever during the day. They're kept isolated in a separate room until the parents can pick them up. So we did bring in a number of measures. We are restricted to no more than 15 students in a room, and many of our classrooms are too small to accommodate 15 students with 1.5 meter separation. So we were actually able to use our sports facilities, our gymnasiums, as classrooms. And that was allowed as a special exception to the normal rules in Germany about specific uses for particular spaces. So all of those things have helped us to maintain the hygiene and social distancing regulations.
Kevin or Paul?
So I would, go ahead. So I could speak to the older kids. I think the masks discussion coming in, many of the things that Andrew has said are in place here with regards to, you know, really visually, you know, having the building speak to you, I guess is what I would characterize it as. So when you look around that idea of 1.5 meter space, kids see it on the ground, they see stickers, you see signs, you see this is a mask zone. We don't have separate entrances, but we have, you know, 1.5 meter taped, you know, going up the thing. So kids start to feel that it is a changed environment. The building and the area speaks to you. But, you know, we've got to all recognize the limits to, I guess, risk and absolute safety and security. When we put up a playground, somebody's going to break their arm. You know, there is some risk in bringing kids back to school. And in our part of Germany, and probably up in Hamburg as well, where we can't ensure social distance, the kids have to wear masks. and the faculty. So in the hallways, if you're going to the bathroom, any of the collaboration areas, those are all what we've got signs called mask zones. In the classroom, with the social distance, the kids do take their masks off, or the teacher can take their masks off. So that's how we've addressed in addition to some of the other measures you've put in place for the older kids.
I think on top of everything that's been said, we're all very similar, but the look and feel of entry to the school is totally different than it was 2 months ago. We have a bus culture. About 80% would be driving in by bus. That presented some issues where the buses that were accommodating some space could be having seating with students seating apart from one another, but it largely brought to attention the need for additional busing and logistics for families dropping off. When you come in, though, you've got the entry on 2 as opposed to 5 entry points, so you're just making sure that the thermal cameras are working and everyone is passing through a gate with all the messaging that you are talking about around the school. I think the only thing I can add there is that the general layout of the classrooms and the layout of the movement between corridors has not really been changed, other than we're going to be monitoring, and it's just basically suggesting that people are not touching. Staff did a wonderful job in creating a sort of videos, and they've been doing this regularly since we've tried to start 4 times now, of what social distancing mean, what it means to greet, how do you greet, the games that you'd be playing instead of out on the playground, what you'd be doing in classrooms, these sorts of things. So it's all been very helpful from that point of view.
Great. And I would imagine that you've had to institute quite a few new cleaning protocols and disinfecting protocols. Could you give us some examples of what you're doing in some of those high touch spaces like science labs, libraries, DT spaces, and so forth? And cafeteria as well. I know, Andrew, you mentioned the cafeteria wasn't open, but that sort of thing. Go ahead, Andrew. You're on mute, though. There you go.
After every session, so after the morning and afternoon sessions, we have a deep cleaning that our staff carries out with appropriate antiviral disinfectants. The regulation in Hamburg is also that students must remain in the same desk, in the same room, throughout the period of phased reopening, so for multiple weeks. We can't have a child in one desk in the morning and a different child in the same desk in the afternoon. So that has further caused challenges in terms of space utilization, but we've managed to find ways to resolve that through using larger spaces. We've been fortunate to have a donation of multiple bottles of disinfectant from a company, and that's been very welcomed. If I may, there was a question or two about masks. We provided 1 free mask to all staff members and all students, and it's washable cloth masks that again were a donation from our community. We found that many students had already arrived on the first day of reopening wearing masks from home, but we have ordered enough to take care of our staff and students for the duration.
Anyone else on the topic of the disinfecting aspect?
I think we've got the hygiene plans in place, but there's, we do have kids at the same desk. So I think it's like that building speaking to you. I think just the changing of behaviors from kids that even though we do periodically, you don't touch your face, you're washing your hands on a regular basis, because we do in the elementary school, we've got that cleaning hygiene, but very possible a kid could come from first period to second period and be in a desk somebody else has been in. So it's changing the behavior that, we've got to wash our hands, we've got to practice all these behaviors.
Shirley, how do you handle that with younger children with play-based approaches to learning? Oops, you're on mute. There we go. We still can't hear you.
Okay, you can hear me now.
Yes.
Yes, well, we've also got all the same as you've been mentioning, that we say to the children that as soon as they come into school, they wash their hands, they hand sanitize their hands. We have hand sanitizers all over the school so that they can sanitize their hands going out to play and coming back in from play, as well as at the beginning of the day. Also in the classroom, we have hand sanitizers as well. So we've used that method more than, we don't actually have masks. It's not a Danish thing at the moment to have masks. Maybe that will change. But at the moment, there are no masks. So we are working solely on social distancing and hand washing, sanitizing. If we want to use any equipment, then that has to be washed and sanitized by the teacher before and after use. So yeah, so we've got anything that we can't wash, we've put away.
Thank you. We've had a lot of questions coming up in the Q&A regarding what all of these changes have done to your budget and staffing implications and other budgeting implications for this year and beyond. Could a few of you speak to that topic, please? Yeah. Let's see, Kevin?
I was just going to add that in addition to what everyone has said, Korea doesn't cease to amaze me. The antiviral sheets that go on elevator buttons and door handles, as well as the plastic partitions that have been placed on top of cafeteria tables. But with regards to the budget, you know, thermal cameras, I don't know if other schools are using these. These were mandated also by the government, where you come in and there's, these are rather expensive items, but 2 were purchased for our school for the 2 entry points. But thermometers was also a government mandate that in classrooms there had to be an emergency kit for the viral kit, it's called, and in that you had the digital thermometers, in addition to thermometers throughout the entire school at entry gate for the guards, etc. And you know, the costs have gone up with regards to the cleaning and the crews and the number of cycles that are needed to keep that in effect. But I think that in general, it sounds pretty much similar to what you have in terms of the supplies of sanitary, sanitizer and all those things across the rooms.
Thank you. Andrew? Oh, now you're on mute.
Just the one thing I might add as a piece of unsolicited advice, we found it was very helpful not to cancel major events until the government authorities had banned them, because you have a little more leverage with the providers of services. If the pandemic has resulted in the banning of events like school trips or the prom, for example, and where possible, we tried to delay the formal notification to the providers until the government had said that we couldn't have these events. And many of the providers have been very reasonable, and either we can delay a trip or an event for a period of time and then you know, keep the payment until then. But of course, they are also experiencing hardship. So it's not an easy situation to resolve.
Thank you. Paul, would you like to weigh in on that question about budget impact?
Yeah, I think the costs have gone up. There's been some cancellation savings, if you will, but in general, the costs have gone up. When you have a teacher doing distance learning program from home and have to put a substitute in the class for substitutes, that cost goes up. I think schools' view on a safe, healthy environment post-coronavirus has changed. So I think we will have different types of healthcare that'll be in place for all of our schools after this is over, which will increase some costs. And then you've got those that are in higher health risk groups. So you've got 60 plus, and you've got somebody that might be immunocompromised. So when you take 20% of your teachers out of the building, there's going to be an impact. So, you know, there's some schools that weren't increased, that, you know, most schools have gone through with increasing their tuition. So I haven't had a lot of this, but I think our community recognizes that in order to deliver DLP or this blended model, that costs certainly aren't going down, and they are going up, but we are trying to mitigate that savings so it doesn't go up further than what we would have done with tuition.
Yeah, great. Shirley.
Yeah, we are also doing twice as much cleaning as we did before, so that's also a cost, but the government has promised to give us a little bit of money towards the cleaning. But the deep cleaning is one of the things that's happening halfway through the day, so the cleaners come around twice a day. But also, like everybody else has said, the fact that we've had to split every class into 2 classrooms also means that we also have to pay, many of our part-time teachers are now working full-time. We have to obviously pay them as full-time teachers. We also have some supply teachers in where we have gaps. So, so yeah, that's our main outlay as well, cleaning and teachers.
Very helpful, thank you. People are asking and have asked before the forum and also now on the chat about how you are supporting faculty and students who may be feeling anxiety or fear around either being around other people, their own pre-existing health conditions that might be complicating that, and whether or not you're giving students and faculty choices about coming back or not. Who'd like to start us out there? Maybe just unmute yourself. Go ahead, Kevin.
Just shared just this week, actually, there was just to staff, actually, that everyone manages anxiety differently, and there's channels to deal with that. And our own counselors, there's also people to talk to, and also we try to get the community to work together. I think that we have the benefit of having everyone in country. They're not spread around the world, as in summer schools in Korea. And it's been generally a very supportive community on that front. There have been some concerns and some issues. It's largely been dealt with by the school. Nothing has had to come to a major crisis in terms of a major pandemic issue or any of that sort of thing, though. But in terms of students, the well-being issue, again, the staff have been tremendous, working with video, keeping positive messages, keeping an alive and active community. I can't fault them on that front. But our counseling services have been running while this has been going on for online, and they've been busy. Students, often children left at home alone, you know, the same issues that they would have had in school would have been existing while they were doing online learning.
Thank you. Paul, looks like you're unmuted.
Yeah, so I would agree with what Kevin has shared already. With regards to the teachers and the counselors have actually just been phenomenal. They're presented with some new challenges, obviously, and some existing challenges that were there beforehand. You know, my work with the faculty has been a few fronts. You know, I've been just about every night making a daily video, which has been work, but I think as the faculty see that the faculty and staff see what you're working with and the communications coming out, you know, real time, it's made a really good connection. We've also done some stuff where we've got this Mayo Clinic happiness book. So there's little excerpts that we've got with the author that say, can we make copies of this to go through just to work on little different areas. So if adults need some counseling, we've got an avenue for that. If it's something you want to work on alone, but I think it's just kind of the authenticity of making sure you're just really in close contact, like everybody in this panel is really important, because if the adults are taken care of, the adults are taking care of the kids, and the system's working. But once the adults start to break down, the whole system starts to break down. So I would say in my role, I've been spending much more time on the adults in the picture so that they have the bandwidth and capacity to do the important work with the kids.
Great point. Shirley, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I would say the same as Paul, actually, that it's important that the teachers are happy. And you know, we spent quite a bit of time together before the children came back. And I think that's another important point, is that to make sure that you do spend time with the teachers before the children come back, because of us, we'd spent a whole month, 5 weeks on our own with our families and not been out, like in many countries. And so actually trying to, you know, do the social distancing and just find your way around the building again and getting used to colleagues does take a little bit of getting used to again. But I would say that even though many of the teachers were very anxious before they came to school, once they'd been in for that day on their own, many of them were fine. So, you know, they worked, and still are working very well as a team and supporting each other. And yeah, it's a credit to them that they know these are different times and we're working together as a team.
Thank you. Andrew.
We're giving our staff members the opportunity to participate in a brief mindfulness or wellness session before the school day starts. And that is happening digitally, which many staff have felt very positively about. But we're really blessed with an outstandingly dedicated staff and faculty, and it certainly has made my work so much easier. They've really risen to the occasion, and certainly they were working hard before the pandemic, but really the hours they're putting in are incredibly long. So it's important to raise this point about wellness and well-being for the adults in the building. As Paul says, it begins with them. And if they have the energy and the stamina to model coping strategies to their students, then the students will respond in kind.
Yeah, those are such important messages, because this isn't, it's not a sprint, right? It's a long marathon. And Kevin, would you like to add to that?
Just what Andrew said, I think since the onset of online learning to the point of entry, the HR element in school, in my school, has definitely increased. I think that but it's a different type of working. There's very, very strong mental issues with regards to concentration. It's a different way of teaching, and obviously the pattern and cycle that one was used to has caused an emotional outpouring of different displays of, I guess it is wellness across the school, and it's talking about it and it's trying to change the patterns for online that we've attributed over first, fifth, and eighth week of the process that tried to change the way that teachers were teaching in order to just force upon them a different type of system, so they weren't getting stuck into one area too much. But I can talk about that further, but it was just to concur that the HR element has definitely gone up over this period of time.
Yeah. And do you have any tips for other schools about how to communicate with parents prior to reopening or during the reopening to calm their fears? Some of you have mentioned earlier that some parents were nervous about sending kids back and being used as guinea pigs. How do you counteract that? Let's see, how about Shirley?
Yeah, I think it's very important that the parents are given as much information as possible before they send their children back. We sent very detailed letters showing them all the Danish guidelines of that we would have desks that 2 meters apart, that the class would be in 2 classrooms, that they'd only be with their class teacher and the support teacher. So we told them all of these things, that there would be 2 lots of cleaning, that they would be sanitizing their hands, that they would only be playing with their class. And I think that's very important, that all those details go down in a letter, and that we have staggered entry, at the beginning of the day and staggered departure at the end of the day, so that they can see that all of these things are in place and it's very organized and we know exactly what we're doing. And then also to keep them informed, I wrote to them a little while before we opened, also just the day before we opened, after the first day, to say we'd had a good day, and at the end of the week. And those parents who were struggling with anxiety of sending their children back, I would say that they were mainly all back by the following Monday, because they could see from the other parents that it had all been in place and it was all working. And I think also, if you're ahead, you have to personify confidence. You have to show that you believe in this and it can happen, it can be safe. And of course, we never know, you can't predict when a case might come into your school, but you can do your very best to make sure that you're as safe as possible.
We had a very similar experience to Shirley. A number of parents expressed concerns, either because family members or children have ongoing chronic conditions that would put them at a higher risk, or simply because they didn't feel that schools should be reopening, even though the authorities had mandated us to do so. But certainly 2 to 3 days into last week, I would say the majority of the children who had remained at home on Monday or Tuesday had joined classes again. And it was that positive kind of word of mouth about the experience that other children had had, the steps we had taken. Like another panelist, we created a video a few days before reopening that showed exactly the route that children would take into the building, and then it showed the signage and the markers, the hygiene stations. And I think that allayed quite a few concerns as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful to know that even if not everyone shows up on the first few days, that, through positive word of mouth, that it could improve over the next few days or weeks. People are asking quite a bit about what you would have done differently. I know some of you are only a few weeks into this, but if there was anything that you could have done differently so that they don't have to make the same errors, what would you suggest? Give you a second to think about that one. It's a pretty big question. Go ahead, Shirley.
Yeah, it's not so much how I would have done things differently, but it's just to give a recommendation to say to people that, when you send things out, you can say, well, this is just a draft and we're still learning, we're all learning. And it doesn't have to be set in stone, that, we can change this if it's not how it should be. And I would say that was very reassuring to the staff, that everything we sent out, we said, if you can think of a better way of doing it, do come and talk to us, do come and you know, discuss it with us, because we're, you know, everything we're doing is new to all of us. And I think that feeling of we're all in it together and we're doing things for the first time is a really good one to keep the morale, and also, you know, to say to people, you know, we're learning, and we did change things, we did adapt things, we did come across new questions. You know, like, for example, our librarian said, okay, the children can't come to the library, so how am I going to get the library books out? And she worked out a way to get the library books down to the children, and that sort of thing. So I think it's just trying to keep everybody thinking that it doesn't have to be how it is today. Tomorrow it could be better.
Great. Paul?
Yeah, I'd echo Shirley's comment about we're all in this together. I think we've always been in a really collaborative culture in many of our schools, but at no time in history have I ever felt like the faculty, the parents, the administration, the principals are all in this together. So I appreciate Shirley making that comment, because it's so true. But I think what would have we done differently? You know, I wish I had a campus twice the size. I wish I had another 40 acres. I wish I had, you know, all of that if you had known it's coming. But I think what went well is to recognize that we have to be nimble, and this might not work, and we might have to change from Friday to Monday, and we might have to change this next week. This half-day program may not be ideal, and we have to go day 1, day 2. So I think just recognizing, and I think we've done a pretty good job at that, although it's not always well received, that we need to be nimble isn't joyful all the time, if you will. But I think when people know you have to change, that this isn't made in stone, and you're looking locally, like what's best for primary, what's best for elementary, what's best for upper, and you're involving the folks, key stakeholders in their space, it tends to work out pretty well. So I would just, I think, reconfirm what Shirley has shared.
Great. Kevin, anything you would do differently? I know you haven't opened yet.
I had the session this morning with ERCOS here in Asia, and yeah, the map is not the territory. So getting stuck into a certain path or suggesting that this is going to be the way forward, it's got to be open to flexibility. I think that everything has changed and it changes again. But if we take it one step further, and what Paul's referring to is, I think, you know, in the future, we're going to be looking at how schools are designed now for these sorts of situations. And that just opens the door to all kinds of what ifs and possibilities. In hindsight, you know, things could be much easier if they were designed differently, I think.
Great. Andrew?
One thing we probably would have done differently, and again, it's hindsight, but our contract that we have between parents and the school specifies that there are events beyond our control which will not result in refunds, but the language did not include the word pandemic, and I suspect that schools around the world will be scrambling like us to revise those documentations and contracts so that in the future, force majeure will be specifically referred to in the contract arrangement, because like many schools, of course, parents are evaluating the perceived quality of the remote learning program, and we think it's outstanding, and we think our staff are doing an amazing job. But you will have families saying, well, some of these extra benefits that come from on-campus learning aren't happening, so we'd like you to offer a refund. And it is important, I think, for us to be extremely clear in the terms and conditions, while also recognizing that many families are struggling very significantly with household finances. So we do have a financial aid program that we have made more flexible during the pandemic period to try to support those families in that way.
Great. On the flip side of what you would do differently, have there been aspects of the reopening that have gone better than expected? Things that you worried about that actually were not as big of an issue as you thought they might be?
I think for us, the number one thing we were impressed by on the very first day was the self-discipline of all the students. I mean, we're talking about a very different world for them entering the school, how they queued, they lined up in an orderly fashion. They followed all the social distancing rules. They wore the masks at the times they were meant to wear them. So we were really impressed that we didn't need to spend a couple of days in reinforcing guidelines and rules. I mean, you obviously always have a few students who need more reminders, but in general, they came in very well prepared for what we were offering them.
Great. Shirley?
Yeah, I would echo what you've just said, Andrew. I think the children were just fantastic. If I was anxious on the very first morning, wondering exactly how all this would happen, I think my main worry was that after the reception class children had been with their parents for over a month, that maybe one of them would cry and not want to come in and all the rest of it, and we wouldn't be able to give them a hug and say it's fine and take them by the hand and take them in. And so I was a little bit worried about reception class arriving, I must admit. But they were fantastic. They came in and so I could see after 10 minutes of just being at the front gates that it was going to be fine. And that's been the whole thing all the way through, that the children have adapted so fantastically to everything they've done and really embraced the new routines. And I don't think some of them can remember how it was before they have what they have now, because when I've gone around the classes and asked them, you know, are you okay, and sitting 2 meters apart, and some of them have even said, oh yes, I have my own desk now, this is fantastic, so much space. So, you know, there have been positives as well. So, but the children, I think, really have, you know, excelled in just adapting to anything and everything.
Any other comments, Paul or Kevin, about what has gone better than expected? You, I haven't had a chance to open yet, I know.
But I can tell you already that the community itself, I know there's going to be very willing to abide by the rules. They're going to already be prepared in advance, and they're going to follow, as they do in Korea, the mandate. And I think teachers have also been really, really helpful over this period of time to make an adjustment in a positive way to a new way of teaching and a new way of living. And that has also been very positive, I think, in terms of there's been very little rejection to the system. They understand that this is a global issue. It's not something cast upon them by one particular school or head of school. This is a serious thing that everybody's banding together to try and support.
Great. Paul, anything to add there?
I think it's pretty well been said. I think it's just what I'm really amazed at the community and the parents and the fact, you know, how it's all come together. You know, everybody's under an enormous amount of stress, and everybody's chipping in to make sure the best possible outcome for all of us.
Great. I've got one quick question and then one more question for everyone. We've had a lot of questions about after-school activities and PE and sports and so forth. Could you tell us what your plans are, whether or not you're hosting any of those types of events at school for the rest of this school year? Go ahead, Andrew.
For us, it's been quite easy because the Hamburg school authorities have made it clear that PE classes and basically all school events cannot happen before the end of the school year. So that would include sports activities, unfortunately. We do belong to an inter-school sports association, so we're already looking ahead to August and trying to strategize as to how the sports season in the autumn months might look, because it is unlikely that we'll be able to fully open all of our sports activities before September at this stage. So the PE teachers have been teaching remotely in some interesting ways.
That's great. Paul, what about FIS?
As we try to crack the door on that one a little bit, you know, an example would be that in Hessen, and I'm not sure in other states, for example, they've made some rules about playing tennis, number of whatever. They've made some rules that you can start to play tennis. So we have courts booked at the local tennis club that have their rules with the coach. So our athletic director's looking and saying, okay, to the upper school kids that would have been on the tennis team, there might be an opportunity for you to use our court time following the social distancing rule. We haven't started that, but to give you an indication of how we crack the door open. And then baseball and softball also have been given some rules to train. So it could be no games, but you know, if we can get a group of kids out throwing the ball around, we'd like to try to make that happen. Hasn't happened yet, but we would look for opportunities to safely do that. With regards to PE, Andrew, same rules down here. So what we're looking with PE, our campus, luckily we have a lot of trails. So we may do like an orienteering type thing that is social distance. So we can't do normal PE, but it might be something different. With trips and excursions canceled and that being mandated, we feel that, you know, with the 11 weeks of online learning, these children have largely been inactive, and it's very important for them to get out and do things with social distancing in mind. Graduation is running, but it's going to be totally different. You know, it won't include guests and family, and it may be more remote in terms of the live feed that's going to be taking place. Obviously, handshakes and the proximity to people will be different, but it's going to take place, and they're actually coming in tomorrow for practice.
Great. Another hot topic that I want to make sure we squeeze in here is, what are your plans if a case were to occur in your school? What are the protocols when and if that happens? Shirley, would you be able to start?
Yes, all our rules come from the Danish health authorities, so we just follow their guidelines. And if we have a case that we suspect, then a little bit like Andrew was saying before, then we put them in a room where they're not with anybody else, and we call their parents immediately, and they have to go home immediately. They also then need to take them to be tested and let us know whether the test was negative or positive. And if it were to come back positive, then we would have to inform all the parents and the class. Not necessarily that they would have to go home, but that they would have to be monitored very closely, although that is very controversial, I have to say, that part of it in Denmark, and some schools would just send the whole class home. But if there is a problem, then we would contact the authorities immediately anyway, because the rules in Denmark are changing constantly because people are questioning the health authorities, and so yeah, so sometimes it's a different rule on one day than from another day. So we would ring them up and we would check with them, and then they would say if we had to close the school, for example.
Thank you. Kevin?
In the case of Korea, it's very simple. The reopening is on the back of if any child or teacher or member associated with the school comes down with COVID-19, the school has to close and goes back to online learning. I think that the scenarios that we have to meet in terms of opening have to meet one of the conditions that what do you do if a child gets it during the day or has a temperature or all these things, and you have an incubation room, you have an area that you have to treat as a triage. Yeah, all the scenarios that you're talking about have to be fulfilled before you can open. But we do have a recognition that in any situation, one case, it's a closure of the school.
Is that similar in Germany, Paul or Andrew?
You know, it would depend. I think we have the Gesundheitsamt would be the group that we would talk with. We have the quarantine room as well. So it would have to be what is the situation. It wouldn't be a carte blanche, the school is closed. My experience so far is they would probably trace that and then make a recommendation to us.
Similar for us in Hamburg, we're required to document when staff arrive and leave during the day, and also when staff are in a classroom with a group of students. All of that is recorded so that we can track and trace rather quickly if there would be a case. We would need to contact our health authorities and they would advise us. We may not have to close the entire school. It could be simply because we have social distancing in place and every child stays in the same room with the same peers. It might be that only that group would need to be affected by not coming into school. What I think other schools may have noticed, though, is that even if the school is told you don't have to close down completely, many parents may choose to keep their children at home, even if they're not directly in contact with the affected person.
Great, thank you all. It looks like we're about running out of time, and there does seem to be some interest in the chat and in the Q&A to continue this conversation at another time when you have a little bit more experience under your belt. So perhaps we could invite some of you back in another month or in a few months to share what you've continued to learn. We just really want to thank you for your time. We know that it's an extremely stressful time for schools and a very busy time, and you're giving us your opinions have really helped. I'm going to pass it back to Jeff to close us out today. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Trillium. And thank you to all of our panelists. A couple of thoughts here, please, before we do wrap this up. I want to say a special kudos to our panelists for really modeling what we mean by resilience and resourcefulness, for being a support to all of our participants. You know, it's like a project that we all have to go through, but we're saying to you all, you go first and tell us how it went so that we can be better prepared. So thank you for showing us what it's looking like in these early days. And thanks to our participants for participating, listening in, contributing your questions, and sharing your thoughts. We are gathering these questions and suggestions for future webinars potentially, and we'll continue to develop these based on your input, including the unique challenges of our boarding schools, I know, which we did not talk about today. Remember to continue this conversation on Twitter using the hashtag NEASC Forum, and look for a recording of today's session on our COVID resources page on our website. Just scroll down to the bottom of that page for our recordings of this and prior sessions. So for our panelists, my co-host Trillium, and everyone at the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, I'm Jeff Bradley saying thank you and keep in touch and be safe.